Rachel Harper was the kind of woman who built her life with precision. 10 years pouring everything into the family business, believing loyalty and hard work would one day earn her the crown. Set in a competitive American construction empire, Rachel was the engine behind every success, while her parents and sister Olivia enjoyed the spotlight. But one Friday afternoon, inside a dusty office file cabinet, she discovered the truth. Her parents had quietly signed the company over to Olivia, months ago, without a word. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. And Rachel? She wasn't going to beg for what was stolen. She would take it back on her own terms. What follows is a story of power, legacy, and vengeance, where justice walks a fine line with cold precision. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. And get ready for one of the most addictive family betrayals you've ever heard. The Harper family's Sunday dinners had always been sacred. A pot roast in the oven, laughter drifting in from the kitchen, and the faint hum of a sports game playing in the living room. It was a picture of tradition. That evening, the air smelled like rosemary and roasted potatoes. My mother, Elaine, called out cheerfully from the kitchen, "Dinner's almost ready, Rachel." I stepped inside, my smile hollow, my heart pounding with a fury I hadn't fully processed. The folder in my purse felt heavier than its weight. I hadn't touched it since Friday afternoon, but tonight, it would change everything. My father, Rick Harper, sat in his usual recliner, reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed what looked like supplier invoices. Olivia, my older sister by 2 years, moved around the table with ease, setting down napkins and wine glasses, chatting with our mother like nothing in the world had changed. And perhaps for them it hadn't. But for me, everything had been blown to pieces. I dropped my coat on the chair and waited. Waited through the small talk, through Olivia's monologue about a marketing campaign she was leading, and my father's absent-minded nods. I pushed food around my plate while pretending to listen. The silence inside me was deafening. After dessert, apple pie, my supposed favorite, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached into my purse and placed the folder in the center of the table. Neatly. Deliberately. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" The room fell still. My mother froze mid-reach, her hand hovering over a plate. Olivia looked down at her lap. My father's face hardened into the mask he wore with difficult clients. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice clipped, almost scolding. "Does it matter?" I answered, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or was I just supposed to keep working 80-hour weeks for a company my sister owns?" My mother gasped softly. Olivia's mouth opened, then shut again. No one spoke. I had been expecting excuses. What I wasn't prepared for was the silence. The guilt in their eyes screaming louder than any defense they could have uttered. "We were going to tell you," my mother finally said, her voice trembling. "We just couldn't find the right time." "The right time," I echoed, letting out a bitter laugh. 6 months ago would have been the right time. Maybe before you signed legal documents behind my back. Maybe before you let me keep killing myself for a future I never stood a chance of having. My father leaned forward, arms resting on the table. "Rachel, this was a strategic decision for the future of the company. Olivia has a fresh perspective. She brings something new to the business. And I don't." My voice rose, unfiltered emotion rushing in. "After everything I've built? After everything I've given up?" He sighed as if I was missing the point. "You're too much like me. Too traditional. Construction is changing. We need to evolve." "So teach me," I snapped. "Why didn't you teach me? Why didn't you talk to me before giving away my life's work?" "It was never meant to hurt you," my mother whispered. "But it did," I said coldly. "And not just because of the decision, but because of the secrecy. Because everyone at that table knew except me." Olivia finally looked up. "Dad approached me with the idea," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for this." "Don't pretend you didn't know what you were taking," I cut her off. "Don't stand there and say it just happened. You signed those papers. You took everything." My father stood, voice firm now. "That's enough. This business decision wasn't made lightly. Olivia has been instrumental in our recent growth. Her expansion plans." I interrupted him. "You mean the same expansion plan I presented to you 3 years ago? The one you said was too risky?" He faltered. "So you gave her my ideas, along with 75% of the company. And what did I get? Another late night. Another deadline. Another year of empty sacrifices. My father straightened, clearly losing patience. You still have a job. A job. I repeated, my voice sharp as glass. I've been running that company while you shook hands on golf courses. My mother reached for my hand again. Rachel, please. You and Olivia have always made a great team. We're not a team, Mom. I'm the workhorse. She's the owner. I turned to Olivia. How many hours did you work last week? She hesitated. 20. Maybe 25. I pulled 3 all-nighters finalizing the Anderson bid. My father slammed his fist on the table. That's enough. I stood. You want to know what I want? Nothing. Not anymore. If Olivia owns the company, she can run it. I quit. You can't, he blurted. You can't just leave. The Maxwell proposal is due Friday. The Anderson deal. Let Olivia handle it. And with that, I picked up my purse and walked out the door. It wasn't until I was 3 blocks away that I realized my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of release. Of finally being done. When Rick tried to justify everything, I didn't need an explanation. All I needed to say was, so I was just the assistant in your master plan and I never knew it. It had started as just another Friday afternoon, the office humming with the low murmur of keyboards, phones, and printers. I was in my usual place, alone in the archive room, knee-deep in folders, searching for the original Riverside contract to double-check a billing discrepancy. The room had been a mess since Olivia's suggestion to reorganize the filing system. Color-coded chaos, she'd called it. A fresh, creative approach. In reality, it was a logistical nightmare. But I didn't complain. I never did. My fingers brushed over the worn tab marked confidential, legal documents. I paused, hesitating for just a second. The Riverside files wouldn't be in there. Still, something pulled me to open it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe something deeper. I flipped it open. My breath caught. On top was a manila folder with bold black letters typed across the tab. Mitchell and Harper ownership transfer executed copy. At first, I thought it was old paperwork from when my grandfather had passed the business down. But when I saw the date, March 15th, 6 months ago, my stomach clenched. I sat down, legs suddenly unsteady. The language was dense, legal, cold. But some phrases stood out like blood splatters on a white shirt. Hereby transfers 75% ownership stake to Olivia Harper. Remaining 25% retained by Richard and Elaine Harper. My name was nowhere. Not on the front page. Not in the fine print. Not in the footnotes. I flipped through every sheet. 20 pages of legal transfer, signatures, notarizations, decisions. And not a single mention of me. The one who had run this company for 10 years. The one who hadn't missed a quarter's close, a client call, or a Christmas deadline. The one who had sacrificed everything. My hands trembled. The office suddenly felt too bright, the fluorescent lights harsh against the shock settling into my bones. I had worked through fevers, missed weddings, birthdays, even funerals. I had pulled the company through 3 economic downturns and landed our 2 biggest clients. And they didn't even think I deserved a heads up. Footsteps approached. I didn't move. Rachel. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her cardigan sleeves rolled halfway up, as if she had just stepped out from her own filing crisis. Her face shifted the moment she saw the folder in my lap. Concern. Then guilt. You knew, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. She looked down at her shoes, those same sensible black flats she'd worn for years. When she didn't answer, I pressed again. Did you know? Her silence was louder than words. Your father asked us not to discuss it, she finally whispered. He said he'd tell you when the time was right. I laughed once, short and brittle. It's been 6 months. Eleanor reached toward me, perhaps to comfort, but I flinched away. I stuffed the folder closed and hugged it to my chest like it could protect me from the betrayal. Who else knows? Most of the senior staff, she admitted quietly. For contract signing purposes. For contract signing purposes. So they trusted Olivia with documents requiring owner signature. While I'd been sitting in meetings she couldn't even be bothered to attend. I rose, folder still clutched tightly. I need to go. Rachel, wait. But I was already out of the room. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't take the Anderson proposal I had worked on for 2 weeks. None of it mattered anymore. The drive home passed in a haze. I ran a red light, nearly sideswiped a delivery truck and barely noticed. All I could think about was every moment of my life that I had believed their promises. Every memory that now rang hollow. Every night I'd worked alone while they made plans without me. When I reached my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, still clutching the folder, my fingers imprinting its edges. My mind ran in vicious loops. Was I not good enough? Was I too strict? Too serious? Too practical? Was I ever really part of their plan? I stared at the blank wall across from me, the one where other people might have hung family portraits. Mine had always stayed empty. I told myself it was because I didn't have time for decor. But maybe I had known, deep down, that this wasn't a home. That I had no real place in theirs. I looked again at the folder. March 15th. They had signed this just days after I closed the Keller development deal. While I celebrated with takeout and a spreadsheet, they were finalizing the paperwork to push me out. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. I could feel the tears rising, but I swallowed them. Not yet. I grabbed my phone. There was only one person I could call. Allison, I said when she picked up. I need to talk. Are you crying? What's going on? They gave the company to Olivia. What? 75%. Behind my back. 6 months ago. There was a long pause. I'm coming over, she said. Don't move. And for the first time in years I didn't. I sat there, frozen in the dark, holding a folder that proved I had never really belonged. In the numbness I didn't know it yet, but something was already shifting. A spark. A decision. One that would change everything. The door clicked behind Allison as she stepped into my apartment, a gust of cold air trailing her in. I hadn't moved from the couch. The folder still sat on the coffee table, untouched since I'd dropped it there after calling her. She took one look at me, still in my work clothes, mascara smudged from tears I didn't even remember crying, and crossed the room without a word. She wrapped her arms around me the way only someone who's seen you at your worst knows how. I didn't speak. I couldn't. We sat there for a long time, her arms steady around my shoulders, the room lit only by the streetlights bleeding in through the windows. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick with grief and disbelief. Finally I found my voice. 10 years, ally. I know, she whispered. I gave up everything. Birthdays. Friends. Even you half the time. And for what? Allison looked at me, her eyes sharp now. For people who never planned to give you what they promised. Rachel, this isn't a mistake. This was a choice. A coordinated betrayal. Her words pierced through the fog in my chest. I kept thinking maybe I missed something. Maybe I wasn't good enough. No, she cut in firm. They used you. They wanted your work ethic, your systems, your sacrifices. But they gave the reward to someone who hadn't earned it. I stared at the wall again. That blank stretch of white that suddenly felt suffocating. The folder on the table seemed to vibrate with its own silent judgment. I had lived my life by a rulebook that they never intended to follow. Allison poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. I took a sip, the act mechanical. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted, but something inside me had shifted. A decision was forming, not out of rage but clarity. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want revenge. I wanted out. I'm done, I said, the words quiet but certain. I won't give them another day of my time. They made their choice. Now they can live with it. Allison nodded slowly. You're serious? I've never been more sure of anything. I spent the rest of the night curled on the couch, wide awake, watching the city lights shift against the ceiling. No sleep came. But for once I wasn't chasing a deadline or worrying about a client's change request. I wasn't mentally drafting emails or project proposals. I was simply still. By morning the clarity remained. I wasn't going back. Not to finish a report. Not to wrap things up. Not even to say goodbye. They had made it clear I wasn't a partner in their future. So I would no longer play the role of their unpaid backbone. I brewed coffee out of habit but left it untouched. My inbox blinked with messages, status updates, meeting invites, follow-ups from Olivia about a proposal she barely understood. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I opened a blank document on my personal laptop and began to write. Not my resignation, not yet. I started listing everything I'd contributed to the company. Client relationships, project milestones, software integrations, efficiency improvements. I wasn't documenting out of spite. I was reclaiming. Item by item, I reminded myself that I wasn't just a workhorse. I was the reason they had grown. By late afternoon, I had something more important than a resignation letter. I had proof of my value, my impact, my role. Not to convince them, but to prepare myself for whatever came next. That evening, Allison returned with takeout and 2 bottles of wine. She didn't ask how I was. She just handed me chopsticks and turned on some quiet jazz. For the first time in a long while, we didn't talk about work. We didn't talk about Olivia or my parents. We talked about college memories, about the beach trip we never took, about the idea of starting over. It felt indulgent. It felt rebellious. It felt necessary. Later that night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, heart calm for the first time in weeks. I was no longer waiting for an apology. I was no longer begging for space at a table I had helped build. I was walking away. Not in shame, but with certainty. The next day I didn't set my alarm. But even without it, I knew what needed to happen next. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to take my power with me, and let them feel the weight of its absence. Monday morning dawned without the shrill cry of an alarm clock. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't need it. I lay in bed long after the sun had climbed high, the silence in my apartment broken only by the occasional sound of traffic below. No calendar reminders. No staff check-ins. No morning meeting prep. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, though I knew the messages were piling up. When I finally checked, I counted 14 unread emails. All work-related. Olivia's name appeared more than once, asking about the Anderson contract revisions, something about a vendor payment, and vague concerns over the Maxwell bid. The timestamps showed she had started sending them at 6 a.m. I ignored them all. I made breakfast. Sat at my table. Ate slowly. By mid-morning the calls started. "Rachel, this is Dad," came the first voicemail. "Listen, I know things are complicated right now. But we have responsibilities and the Anderson client needs attention." An hour later, another. "Maxwell Anderson just called. He's threatening to pull the entire project if he doesn't speak with you by the end of the day. Rachel, this is serious." That one I played twice. Maxwell Anderson wasn't just another client. His company accounted for nearly 30% of our annual revenue. Losing him would be catastrophic. And apparently Olivia had no idea how to hold it together. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching pedestrians below hurry toward somewhere that wasn't falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. For a decade, I had shouldered every emergency, absorbed every crisis, and buffered my family from the consequences of their own neglect. Now they were feeling what it meant to lose the one person who made their chaos manageable. By day 3, the texts grew desperate. Eleanor emailed twice, asking for clarification on vendor timelines. A junior associate called me directly, apologizing for the intrusion but begging for guidance on a site that had stalled because Olivia wasn't sure what the permitting schedule looked like. So I said nothing. Not to any of them. Not even when Maxwell himself called. "Rachel," he said, voice heavy with impatience, "I've been working with your sister for the past week and I'll be honest, she doesn't know half of what you do. No offense, but it's a mess. What's going on?" I took a breath, steady and deliberate. "I'm on extended leave, Mr. Anderson. If you need anything, you'll have to go through Olivia." That's not what I asked. He was right. But I wasn't going to fix it. "I'm no longer managing the project," I said simply. "If you're not confident in the current leadership, I understand if you explore other options." There was a pause. Then, "If your situation changes, you have my number. And for the record, I follow good people, not logos." When we hung up, I didn't feel pride. I felt hollow. But underneath that, a slow-burning clarity was forming. They didn't just want me back, they needed me back. Not because of loyalty, but because without me, their foundation was cracking. By Thursday, Dad's calls had shifted tone. "This isn't a game, Rachel. Anderson is threatening legal action. The Maxwell bid isn't done. Olivia's drowning." I didn't answer. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw him, my father, Rick Harper. Hair mussed, tie loose, face drawn in a way I had never seen. I almost didn't answer. But avoiding confrontation had never been my nature. I opened the door and stepped aside. He entered without a word, pacing the living room like a man on the edge. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snapped, his voice already cracking under pressure. Anderson is pulling his contract. Westridge is asking questions. The Maxwell proposal is late. Olivia's panicking. I crossed my arms, standing by the window. Sounds like a management issue. He stopped pacing. Rachel, this isn't funny. No. It's not, I said evenly. You gave the company to someone who can't run it. This is the result. He sighed, deflated. I didn't come to fight. Then why are you here? He looked at me, really looked as if seeing me not as his daughter, but the professional he'd ignored for far too long. I came to offer you a solution, he said. Chief Operations Officer. Full autonomy over projects. Double your previous salary. Corner office. I nearly laughed. You want me to do the same job? For more money. But still under Olivia. You'd report directly to her, yes. And you think that's acceptable? He hesitated. What do you want? I didn't blink. 40% ownership. A board seat. Reasonable work hours. And equal authority. His face fell. That's impossible. Olivia owns 75%. She can sell some back. Or you and Mom can redistribute. I don't care how you make the math work. He shook his head. You're being unreasonable. Westfield called yesterday, I said calmly. They offered me a director role. Profit sharing. 4 weeks vacation. Normal hours. And a team that wants me. He froze. You wouldn't. They're your biggest competitor. They also believe I'm worth something. His voice dropped. How long do I have before you accept? 2 days. And with that I gave him what he'd never given me, a deadline. Let him sit in the panic. Let him feel the countdown. By the time Friday rolled around I had heard nothing from my father. Not a call. Not a message. Not a knock at my door. The silence was more telling than any argument. It meant he was weighing his options, trying to calculate if losing me was worth clinging to the imbalance he had created. But I didn't wait. That morning I met Garrett Westfield at a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. Garrett had built Westfield Developments from the ground up. Modern, lean, and fiercely competitive. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. I've been watching your work for years, he said as we Saturday. Frankly, I've been waiting for this conversation. He slid a folder across the table, my name printed neatly on the tab. Inside was an official offer. Operations Director, full control over project strategy, a starting salary 20% higher than my last, and a clear path to equity. I won't insult you with interviews, Garrett continued. I know what you bring. If you're ready, this is yours. It was more than I expected. And yet I didn't say yes. Not yet. I appreciate the offer, I told him. I need the weekend to think. He nodded once. Take all the time you need. But if you walk in on Monday, the office is yours. I left the cafe with the offer in my bag and my mind racing. I had spent years being indispensable without recognition. And now the one thing I had begged for, a seat at the table, was being handed to me somewhere else. But Mitchell and Harper wasn't just a job. It was my legacy. My blueprint. My blood. And if I were to return, it wouldn't be on my knees. Late that afternoon the call came. We want to meet, my father said. All of us. Tomorrow. Noon. Riverfront restaurant. Harold will be there too. Harold? I asked. Our attorney. To help formalize whatever's decided. I agreed, then ended the call before he could add anything sentimental. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. That night I prepared like I would for any high-stakes negotiation. I laid out the facts, rehearsed my position, anticipated counterarguments. I reminded myself that this wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about standing in front of the people who had taken me for granted and telling them, without apology, what I was worth. When I arrived at the restaurant the next day, they were already seated. My mother looked nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. Olivia's face was unreadable. My father appeared guarded, jaw set tight. And next to them, Harold Peterson opened his leather portfolio, pen at the ready. I didn't sit right away. I looked each of them in the eye. I'm here to discuss terms, I said. Nothing else. Harold motioned to the seat across from him. I sat, placed a folder on the table and opened it. These are my conditions. 40% ownership. A permanent board seat. Equal decision-making power with Olivia. and a commitment to a sustainable work culture. My mother looked down. Olivia blinked. My father opened his mouth, but it was Olivia who spoke first. I'll transfer 35% from my shares. All eyes turned to her. I don't want to be the majority owner, she continued. I never asked for that. Dad offered it like it was a gift and I didn't understand what I was taking from you, Rachel. Not really. Caught me off guard. The apology. The honesty. For the first time Olivia looked unsure, not of her role but of her right to have ever accepted it. You could have said something earlier, I said, guarded. I know, she admitted. But I thought maybe you wouldn't want to work with me again. I looked to Harold. Can we draft the paperwork based on this transfer? Yes, he said, already jotting notes. We'll need to update the ownership ledger and submit a new board structure document. But it's doable. What about voting rights? I asked. What's the governance structure? 3 votes, Harold replied. Your parents retain their 25% as a single voting block unless they divide it. With your 40 and Olivia's remaining 40, all major decisions will require at least 2 of the 3 parties to agree. That was acceptable. And work policy? I added. My father shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean? No more 80-hour weeks, I said. Executives work a maximum of 45 hours. Mandatory vacation. If you want me back, we work smarter. Not until we collapse. He started to protest, but Olivia cut in. She's right. I've been drowning these past 2 weeks trying to keep up. It's not sustainable. It was the first time we had ever agreed on anything. By the time dessert arrived, the framework was set. Ownership would be redistributed. Roles clearly defined. Olivia would manage creative direction and client relations. I would handle operations and delivery. And my father, at long last, would step back. Before we left, I looked each of them in the eye again. I'm giving this one more chance. Not because I forgive you, but because I've earned it. And for once they didn't argue. But despite the signatures and promises, I wasn't ready to return just yet. I needed time, not to reconsider, but to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried beneath their expectations. I didn't sleep much that night. Even with the agreement outlined and everyone seemingly on the same page, my mind kept replaying every conversation, every subtle betrayal, every moment I had been left in the dark. I wasn't returning to the same company. That version of Mitchell and Harper, the one I had given everything to, was already gone. What was left now was a fractured structure, a broken trust, and a question I couldn't stop asking myself. Could I ever truly rebuild something with the same people who had torn it down? The next morning I woke without an alarm again, but this time it was intentional. I didn't have to rush, didn't have to calculate the hours between my coffee and my first crisis. The meeting was set for noon and I planned to walk into it with clarity, not resentment. I took time getting ready, carefully choosing a navy blazer, simple jewelry and subtle makeup. I needed to look like the professional they had underestimated, but more importantly like someone they couldn't ignore anymore. When I arrived at the riverfront restaurant, the hostess led me to a private room at the back. The curtains were drawn, a pitcher of water already on the table. My mother stood to greet me with a smile that felt too hopeful. Just checking on you, she said gently. You look strong. I nodded, not offering a hug. Inside the room, Olivia and my father sat beside Harold, who was already reviewing documents. Olivia looked up and gave a tentative smile. My father, ever the strategist, wore a neutral expression. I could feel him calculating again, trying to guess what I would say, what I might still demand. Thank you for coming, Harold began, motioning to the seat across from him. Let's begin with Olivia's ownership adjustment. Olivia took a breath and spoke before anyone else could. I want to say something first. She looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Rachel. Truly. I know what I took, what I didn't earn. When Dad first offered it to me, I thought he saw something in me that he didn't in you. And that made me feel validated. I didn't think beyond that. I didn't consider what it meant for you. I studied her face, looking for insincerity. I didn't find any. She continued, I've been trying to manage your role for 2 weeks. And I'm drowning. The Anderson specs read like a foreign language. I haven't slept. Clients keep asking for you. I understand now. I'm not built for this alone. I never was. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't look away. My father cleared his throat, his voice more subdued than I'd ever heard it. What your sister is trying to say is, we made a mistake. He had never said those words to me before. Not once. You didn't just make a mistake, I replied, my tone steady. You made a decision. Without me. You chose to reward loyalty you hadn't tested over loyalty that had been proven over and over again. My mother leaned forward, her hands folded. We've hardly slept since you left, Rachel. Not just because of business problems. Because we hurt you. That was never what we wanted. Harold gently redirected the room. If we're in agreement, Olivia will transfer 35% of her shares to Rachel, retaining 40%. Richard and Elaine maintain their combined 25%. Rachel will join the board and hold equal voting power. All executive decisions will now require majority approval. There was a collective nod. Additionally, I said, not missing a beat, we will implement a new executive policy, 45-hour maximum work weeks, mandatory vacation time and regular performance reviews. The culture of burnout ends here. Even my father didn't argue. Harold took down the terms, his pen scratching across the paper like a judge finalizing a verdict. When he was finished, he slid the preliminary letter of intent across the table. One by one they signed, Olivia first, then my mother, my father, and finally me. As I set the pen down, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't closure. It was a beginning. After the formalities, Olivia stood and gestured toward the patio outside. Can we talk? Just the two of us. I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped outside, the river behind us shimmering in the noon sun. I never wanted to hurt you, Olivia began again. When Dad approached me, he said you were too valuable to move. That the company needed you right where you were. And you believed that? I asked, the skepticism clear. I wanted to, she admitted. For the first time, I wasn't the artsy disappointment. I was finally being taken seriously. I sighed. You thought I was the favorite. I thought you were the chosen one. Maybe we've both been living in a story someone else wrote. We stood there, both of us trying to figure out how to exist in a shared space without competition. I don't want to be CEO, she said finally. But I do want to contribute. I have ideas. Creative ones. But I can't implement anything without someone like you. For the first time I believed her. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a path. When we returned to the table, Harold handed us the full draft to review. We signed it without hesitation. The structure was sound. Our roles were clear. As we prepared to leave, my father looked at me. Will you come back to the office on Monday? Anderson is still threatening to leave. I met his eyes and smiled politely. Not Monday. I need time. And I have another offer to decline. His brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. I was still officially on vacation. And for the first time I was going to take it, all of it. Starting with a week of doing absolutely nothing. No work. No guilt. Just space to breathe. I didn't pack a laptop. I didn't check my email. I didn't leave an out-of-office note beyond the automatic reply I'd already set. Instead, I booked a last-minute flight to a quiet beach resort 2 hours south. No itinerary. No plans. Just a bag of books I hadn't had time to read over the past 5 years. A sun hat and silence. The first morning I woke up in the resort bed. The air smelled like salt and clean cotton. I blinked slowly, unsure what time it was, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime I didn't care. I didn't reach for a phone. I didn't reach for a to-do list. I lay there simply breathing. Days blurred into sunrises and waves. I walked barefoot in the sand. I ate every meal without distraction. I swam without thinking about deadlines. I slept deeply, without dreaming of unfinished reports or angry client calls. Somewhere in the second week I felt something I hadn't known was missing. Stillness. Back in the city, the office was adjusting. Olivia texted me updates every few days, short and professional. Westridge approved the redesign. Anderson's team is waiting for your return. There was no pressure in her tone, no subtle digs. Just respect. For boundaries. For distance. For recovery. When I returned home, I didn't immediately walk into the office. I met with a career counselor instead. She helped me assess what I wanted, not just from the company, but from my life. Together we set new personal rules. Clear working hours. Defined boundaries. Weekly check-ins with myself, not just my team. It felt absurd at first. But by the end of our third session it felt like control. Not over others, but over myself. That Friday night I met Allison for dinner. She studied me across the table like she was trying to confirm what she suspected. "You're different," she said. "I am," I replied. "You going back?" "I think so." She raised a brow. "And if they mess up again?" I smiled, calm and grounded. "Then I'll leave. And this time I won't need anyone's permission to do it." The next morning I returned to the office, not for a meeting but to quietly collect a few things. It was early. The building was mostly empty. As I walked through the glass door, something caught my attention. A whiteboard in the corner of the planning room, my planning room, filled with half-finished notes in Olivia's handwriting, several of them crossed out in frustration. He had tried. That meant something. My new office wasn't the corner one that had once belonged to my father. That space carried too much weight, too many ghosts. Instead, I chose a sunlit room with large windows and minimal furniture. Calm, open, forward-facing. I hung a photo on the wall of the first blueprint I ever drew by hand at 12 years old. I kept no pictures of my family. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Eleanor stopped by. She lingered in the doorway, unsure. "Hey, she asked. I nodded. She stepped in slowly, her eyes scanning the space. "The place feels different," she said. "Better." I gave her a small smile. "We're trying something new." "You're different too." "Good different. Powerful different." That night I left the office by 6 o'clock sharp. No guilt. No laptop under my arm. I had dinner reservations. Nathan Rivera was already waiting at the restaurant when I arrived. We had crossed paths on projects before. He was an engineer with Anderson's firm, but only recently had we begun to talk about things beyond piping systems and build timelines. There was a quiet steadiness about him. No flash. No games. "How was the beach?" he asked as I sat down. "Perfect," I replied. "I did absolutely nothing. On purpose." He smiled. "That's a skill." "I'm still learning," I admitted. Over dinner we talked about travel, books, food. We didn't talk about work until the very end when he asked carefully, "So you're going back?" "Yes," I said. "But not as the old version of me." "Good," he nodded. Because that version didn't get nearly what she deserved. The next week I resumed my role officially, this time as co-owner and chief operations officer. My first act? Instituting a no-email policy after 7 p.m. company-wide. A small shift, but symbolic. Olivia, for her part, stayed in her lane. She flourished in client relations, marketing campaigns, and visual design. I focused on timelines, budget efficiency, and staff development. Together we created a rhythm. Balanced, sustainable, and most surprisingly effective. Maxwell Anderson renewed his contract. Westridge signed a new one. Internal teams worked shorter hours, but more efficiently. No more burnouts. No more backhanded promises. At the end of the quarter we'd already exceeded projections. I left the office that Friday with my bag light and my head clear. I had a second date planned with Nathan. And after that, maybe nothing at all. I wasn't ready to forgive everything. But I was ready to live again. Not just exist. Not just endure. And that meant, eventually, returning to the one place that still carried the most weight. Our family dinner table. Sunday arrived with a stillness that felt unfamiliar. Not the kind that precedes a storm, but the quiet that follows one. A calm that had been earned, not gifted. I had debated it all morning whether or not to go. The invitation had come from my mother earlier that week. Not a demand, not a guilt trip. Just a simple message. "We're having dinner. We'd love to see you." No expectations. And so I stood at my door, purse in hand, keys trembling slightly between my fingers. This was the house where I'd once believed everything was built on loyalty and trust. It was also the house where that illusion had shattered. Olivia greeted me at the door. Her smile was soft, not performative. She didn't reach for a hug. She simply stepped aside and said, "Glad you came." Inside, the kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, just as it always had. The table was already set. My father sat at the head, less rigid than I remembered. My mother flitted between stove and counter, humming softly. Something about it all felt human. Dinner conversations steered mostly clear of business. My mother talked about her garden. Olivia shared a story about a client who mistook a floor plan for abstract art. My father stayed quiet, watching us with a gaze I couldn't quite decipher. Not judgment. Not control. Something closer to reverence. Or perhaps the slow realization that control had passed on. After dessert, as we cleared the plates, he approached me in the kitchen. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said, eyes on the floor before finally meeting mine. "That board presentation you and Olivia gave last week? It was exceptional. Better than anything I could have done." It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But coming from him, it may as well have been a confession. "We make a good team," I replied, the words natural but grounded. "Different strikes. Different lenses." He nodded awkwardly. "I should have seen that sooner." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A few days later, Olivia and I stood side by side in the boardroom. Our 5-year strategic plan presentation was scheduled for that morning. The room was full. Senior staff, partners, and a few key clients. She opened with her vision for brand expansion into emerging residential markets. I followed with operational changes to support that scale. Automation upgrades, vendor restructuring, a new recruitment strategy. We didn't interrupt each other. We built on each other's points. When the final slide faded from the projector, there was a beat of silence. Then unanimous approval. We didn't celebrate with champagne or a party. Instead, back in my office, Olivia raised a glass of sparkling water. "To losing the business," she said with a dry smile. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. If Dad hadn't made that ridiculously stupid decision," she explained, "we'd still be stuck in our old roles. You, killing yourself for credit. Me, avoiding any responsibility. Him, controlling everything. Sometimes losing what you think you want leads to getting what you actually need." I considered it, then clinked my glass against hers. "To finding something better." Later that evening, I stood on my apartment balcony looking out over the city lights. The same skyline I used to associate with late nights and burnout now shimmered with new meaning. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. "Still on for tomorrow?" I smiled, responding quickly. "Yes." I had a meeting-free Monday. My calendar had room for real life now. The business was thriving. Olivia had brought in 3 new accounts. I'd implemented scheduling tools that reduced our timelines by 12%. The staff, many of whom had looked exhausted for years, now stayed late only by choice, not pressure. Even my father had started mentoring interns instead of dictating operations. He seemed relieved. Maybe letting go had been a gift in disguise. The photo I had once turned face down, of all of us at the company's 25th anniversary, was now framed again, but in a different place. Not on my desk where I'd stare at it daily. On a bookshelf. A part of history, not a compass. I went to the gym 3 times a week. I joined a book club. I was even looking into adopting a dog. A scrappy little terrier that barked too much and didn't know how to sit still. The following Sunday, I returned to dinner again. This time it felt less like an act of reconciliation and more like a new tradition. A beginning rather than a repair. My father didn't talk much, but he watched everything. Olivia joked, my mother beamed, and I felt at peace. As we cleared the dishes, Olivia appeared in the kitchen beside me. "You're really coming into your own," she said. "I finally let myself," I replied. She paused, then asked, "Do you think we'll ever be normal?" I dried a plate, thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe. Or maybe we'll be better." Later that week, we presented to the full board again, this time for quarterly results. We stood with ease beside each other, our dialogue seamless, our dynamic undeniable. I caught my father watching from the back of the room, his face unreadable, but his eyes full of something close to wonder. Afterward, as Olivia and I toasted quietly in my office, she asked, "Do you miss the old version of us?" "No," I answered without hesitation. "That version burned itself out trying to be enough. This one knows her worth." I looked out at the skyline again, this time with no fear of what Monday might bring. Because now, I wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine. I wasn't a daughter working in the shadow of a promise. I was a woman who had reclaimed everything she was owed, and more. A woman who no longer waited for recognition. A woman who built her justice brick by brick. With steady hands. And a clear voice. And she wasn't going back. And so, Rachel's journey wasn't just about reclaiming a seat at the table. It was about redefining the table itself. She didn't burn bridges. she rebuilt them on her terms. With every step, she turned betrayal into power, silence into strategy, and a family legacy into something worthy of her name. What would you have done if the people closest to you handed your life's work to someone else? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories that strike at the heart of justice, identity, and strength.